Well, welcome to the City Rev Life podcast. I'm Pastor Robey, and we have a guest here, my good friend, Pastor Chris Baselice.
Hey, everyone.
The campus pastor at Calvary Plantation, and he's going to share his story and what God has done in his life, overcoming the coronavirus. So excited to hear that. So you're the campus pastor at Calvary Plantation. Before that, what were you at Calvary before that?
I got saved at Calvary in 2002, and I was kind of working out in the world, in the business world, and when the Lord kind of got my attention, everything changed for me, and I just began to feel this call for ministry, and started serving over there in the children's ministry, moved my way up to high school, and then one day God opened the door for me to come on staff, and been there ever since for going on 12 years now.
Well, love Chris and love what you're doing at Calvary Plantation. Mm-hmm. He's a brother to us, and of course we love Calvary. And the other thing is, one of the other reasons we've brought Chris here is I'd like to get a question answered for me. It's about Pastor Doug. So Pastor Doug, also a good friend, but he talks about how he plays basketball. I know you play sports, you work out, you lift, you're athletic. But you've actually played basketball with Doug. Yes. So is it, does he live up to what I would expect, the hype of his basketball skills?
Yes, he is. Tim Duncan has been called the big fundamental.
Yes.
We also refer to Doug in that way as well.
Wow.
He's a bulldog out there. He knows angles. He's strong. He will destroy you if you take him out on the basketball court. So I personally have kind of shied away from that because I don't want to get hurt.
When you say he'll destroy you, are we talking he'll body check you onto the ground?
Oh, yeah. Oh, he'll
Is he
take
sneaky?
your legs. No, I mean, it's all legal, but he's just, you kind of underestimate him, and it's just not a good thing. I've decided that I will no longer be on a basketball court with him. He seems like
he'd be too nice to do something like that.
You would think so, but everything goes out the window when he's on the court. Everything. So yeah, I wouldn't advise it. But yeah, he's pretty good. You've
been warned about playing basketball with Doug Souter.
Yes.
I've personally always wondered that. But we're today talking about Chris, what you just walked in this last season with coronavirus. And so, man, share with us your story. I also want to hear not only what you've walked through, but I know as a pastor, in this community, many in this community, including many here at City Rev, we're praying for you and your family.
Yes.
And so would love to hear not just what God, brought you through medically, but what he's taught you in this journey. So Tell us the story. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, so for me, we last year had looked at spring break in March, and we said, we're going to go on vacation. It's my son's birthday. Yeah. We saved up. We actually bought a cruise for the family. And so obviously coronavirus starts to break out overseas, and we're kind of keeping an eye on that. And as we get closer and closer and closer, we had to make a decision. Are we going to go on this cruise where it seemed like a lot of people were getting it when they would go on a cruise ship, or would we kind of decide to stay home? So talking to people, praying, we decided we're going to go. Now, I am a germaphobe of germaphobes, and I start to buy vitamin C and elderberry and all this stuff. I'm pumping my family filled with it. If we're going to go on this cruise, we're going to be ready. We're going to be washing our hands constantly. I'm praying to the Lord to protect us. And so we go on to this ship. We have
the whole family.
The whole family. My wife, Shona, my daughter, Savannah, and my middle son, Elijah. Our youngest son, Jacob, has CP. And so my mom came in town to watch him. Okay. So we go on the cruise ship. It was an amazing vacation. We had the best time. It was real. There's one good thing I can say. We had a great time. And then we get back, and as we get back, actually when we're on the ship, we could see the news, and we could see the country's starting to shut down. This thing is starting to spread. So when we get back off the ship and we find ourselves back home in Florida, things are very different. My daughter, 2 days after, she comes home and she has a cough. And so again, germaphobe Chris, quarantine her to her room until you get better. And that lasted for her for a few days. But I can remember one night I went to bed and I fall asleep. My son had kind of snuck into our room, fell asleep in our bed, and I just can't sleep with him because he fights when he sleeps. He's all over the place. So I ended up sleeping in his bed, and I love his bed, super comfortable.
So you left him there
with my wife.
With your wife?
Yes, and they both sleep like bears, nothing will wake them up.
Okay.
I'm a super light sleeper.
All right.
Yeah.
So you didn't leave him to just, punch and kick your wife?
Oh, no. They'll go at it together.
Okay, so she can handle herself.
Yeah, she can handle it. I cannot.
So you're the one who's too wimpy to handle it, but your wife can handle it.
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to make sure we understand
I retreated out of the room. I gave up my bed to my son. So I go into his bed, and I wake up the next morning, and I'm like, man, like, there must be something wrong with his bed because I've got like the pain in my body was serious. And I'm like, this is weird. And maybe there's like a knot in his bed or something. And so that goes on for a couple days. I've got really bad body aches. Cough starts to develop. Fatigue sets in. I feel very tired. And I'm like, you know what? This may be the flu. This may be something else. Let me just quarantine myself in the back room of our house. So I'm like, I'm just going to get through this. And my wife is, taking care of me and giving me soup and all that good stuff and vitamin C. But there was one day I kind of took a shower, get out, and I have addiction to cologne. Love cologne. So I spray cologne.
Like what kind of cologne are we talking about? Do you have a particular?
Creed is a brand that I like a lot. Very strong. So as soon as I sprayed it on, I couldn't smell a thing. And I'm like, man, this is weird. I can't smell anything. At this time, the loss of sense of taste and smell hadn't come out yet. Nobody knew that was actual symptom of coronavirus. So I'm like, okay, that's really weird. Go to bed, wake up the next morning, and then on the news, you see it everywhere. A new symptom for coronavirus, loss of your taste and smell. And I'm like, oh, man.
You said the next day?
Yeah, the very next day.
Wow.
So that happened, and I'm like, okay, I know I got it now. At that time, many people were saying, and it's true, some people can have a very mild case of it. It could seem like a cold. It could seem like the flu that you get over in a couple days. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to quarantine myself. I'll get better. I'll be fine.
But at this point, what's your emotional, like you've been sick. Obviously you don't feel well, which is that in and of itself. But when that realization hits you, is that like a pit in your stomach, your heart drops kind of moment, or is it just kind of like, oh, hey, I'll get through this, it'll be fine?
Yeah, at that point I was thinking, okay, I'll be fine.
Okay.
I was, again, a lot wasn't known about the virus at that point, and I'm just thinking, okay, this is just going to be like a cold for me. I'm going to be fine. Vitamin C is going to kill this thing, and I'll be good. So I start to wait it out, and as I wait it out, my cough starts to get worse. It becomes more and more difficult to breathe. We have someone on our staff who's married to a nurse, so I'm calling them and saying, hey, at what point do you think I should go to the hospital? And at that point, my breathing was very labored, and she's like, you need to go now. So it was a Friday night, and it was a Saturday night. Drove over to Memorial Miramar. My mask on, the tent is set up outside. It was very surreal. And they test me, they give me an x-ray. They're like, you have pneumonia. And I'm like, okay. And I couldn't breathe. They wanted to send me home, actually. She's like, do you want to go home? And I'm like, no, I don't want to go home. I can't breathe. So they kept me. And that night, tested me for coronavirus. The next day, those results came back positive. And so I found myself there. They gave me the breathing tube in my nose to help me breathe, which made it like night and day. It kind of changed everything. But I stayed in the hospital there for 5 days.
5 days.
Yeah.
Okay, let's retrace.
Yep.
You get off the cruise what day?
We got off the cruise on a Sunday morning.
Sunday morning. Then then when did you feel like, when was you saw on the news about the sense of smell?
I think that was on a Thursday.
So it was that Thursday, 4 days later?
Mm-hmm.
And then now you are Saturday night, you go to the hospital.
Correct.
Then you're there for another 5 days.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. And so find myself there, and that situation was probably one of the most difficult. It's a place, obviously, where they're trying to keep people who have the virus away from everyone else. So you get put into your own room. You're secluded. The nurses and doctors don't necessarily want to come in and touch you. So they'll come in every couple hours as they have to give you your meds. So it's a place of, again, nobody wants to be around you, and yet you can't find rest because every time you go to sleep in a couple hours, someone comes in, takes blood, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it's like what we've been, hearing from those at our church that are doctors and nurses. If the challenge for them is as they're continually around corona patients, they are in a perpetual state of isolation when they go home, because they can't be around corona patients all day and then go back home and be around their family, or they've got to figure that out. Yeah. And so, they're here, they've got a patient and they're trying to figure out, they've got to keep their distance, which is making you isolated.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
tough.
And even before that, I think it really started to hit me when I was home, not being able to touch my family and my kids. I can remember there'd be times when I'd walk out of the back room and pass them to go to our room to get something, and I would see my son Jacob, who obviously requires a lot of care, and I he is just like, I love to just hold him and hug him and kiss him. My other son's kind of at a point now where he doesn't like that as much. So I do that with Jake, and I couldn't do it. And it was like I would walk by and just start crying as I went into the room. That began this process of not just not just physical like sickness, but this mental aspect of the sickness that really can almost be just as bad as what I was feeling physically. So I'm in the hospital and they're giving me different medications. But I'd say the most difficult moment in the hospital was it was one night, and I'm pretty sure it was my wife who called. Again, the whole ordeal was very surreal. I couldn't eat because I had no taste, and I just didn't want to eat anything. And so I lost 15 pounds over the course of like a week and a half. And not only was that happening in me, but my wife calls and tells me, I've got a fever and I've got a cough. And so in that moment, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, she's got it too. It's going to spread to our children. I start to think of my son Jacob, who again has CP, and what happens if he gets it and has to go to the hospital. If he goes to the hospital, we can't even be in the same room with him. And again, he requires so much care, and who's going to take care of him? So fear just washes over me. Like I just felt so empty, like my soul, just everything. And so I hang up the phone. Our church, Pastor Doug calls me. He's like, hey, just so you know, we're going to do everything we can to take care of the family. We're praying, all this stuff. And hang up the phone. And I kind of had this moment with the Lord. And it's kind of hard to describe. You know, there's times when you say you hear from him, but it's not an audible thing. Mm-hmm. But we're having this like exchange. And I almost felt like I heard him say, Chris, do you trust me with your family? And I had to like process it for a moment. And I came to the point where I said, of course I do, Lord. And as soon as I said that, this peace, I can't even explain the peace. It's a peace that passes knowledge. Right. It washed over me, and I was able, and it was very difficult to sleep in the hospital, but suddenly I just felt a peace. I was able to roll over, and I passed out. And that was probably the hardest part of being in the hospital, separated from my family in that moment. But the Lord so showed up in that moment.
It's crazy because a question like that, like, do you trust me with your family? I mean, if in another season and you're just driving down the road and, you know, sun's out, fluffy white clouds, blue sky, do you trust me with your family? Sure, I trust you with my family. But you're isolated, incapacitated, and you find out your wife sounds like she might have coronavirus as well. And, you know, you've got two other teenagers almost, and then your youngest who requires care. That's a terrifying moment.
Yeah.
Where your health-wise, was that stabilizing in the hospital, or was that up and down in the hospital?
So it was pretty. It never really changed in the hospital. So they're giving me the different medications that they're giving to patients who have COVID right now. I wasn't sensing getting better at all. So what they were really looking at is, was I able to breathe on my own? So once I got to that point, there's like, okay, well, you can go home now. So I was asking them, hey, when can I go home? Because I'm thinking I got to get back home to help. So it was a Wednesday when I got released and went back home, but still had to wait it out in the back room because I didn't know if my family had it, how contagious I still was. So it was about another week and a half of still having the symptoms and being sick and staying in the back room of the house.
Wow.
Yeah.
So let's go back to that moment. You find out that your wife sounds like she has the coronavirus. Mm-hmm. She hasn't been tested, but it's sounding pretty much like that's the situation. And at that point, I mean, understandably, just fear, terror, horror washes over you, and the Lord goes to work on you, and then He knocks you out.
Yeah.
That peace, is that something you had to fight for through the rest of the journey? How did that work? Did you feel like that was a definitive moment where the Lord gave you peace that sustained you, or was it a place you had to come back to through the journey? Yeah,
I think Psalm 119:71, the psalmist says, "It's good for me that I've been afflicted, that I may learn your statutes." And I always believe that God is in control of even the most difficult times of our life, and He's trying to teach us something. He's trying to change us. So in that moment, as I processed that over the next couple of days, I pride myself on being able to care for my son. He requires being picked up and lifted and moved all around, and I do. And I thank the Lord often, like, God, thank you that I have health and I can do those things. He took all that away from me, and I had nothing to rely on except for Him. And God did that, I think, initially when we had Jacob and we got the first diagnosis, because I believe that even though I'm a Christian, I'm a pastor, I love the Lord, I still have idols. You know, Keller would say our hearts are these idol factories. It's a constant battle in my life of God exposing what those idols are and then bringing me to a place where I'll surrender them to him. And I think I was taking a lot of pride in my own ability and my strength, and those are gifts from God. And in that moment, I feel like what the Lord was trying to teach me is like, all of those things can be gone in an instant. Chris, you could lose your health like that. But the one thing that I need most, I can never lose, which was Christ. And so I just found this fresh sense of dependency upon him, which I think he's always trying to create in us. That abiding life, I think, is found in dependency. And sometimes when you just get in the routine of life, and sometimes when you rely too much on the gifts that he's given you, you start to depend on the gifts more than the gift giver. And I think it was a reminder for me of Chris, everything good that you have, I've given you. But if I wanted to, I could take those away in a moment. And I feel like he took some of those away to just remind me of where my hope is and where my strength is, and kind of reset my heart on Jesus. I was in a season, I think, of just the routine of life. And it was hard. I mean, church and family, and it was just go, 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 go. And as much as I look back and it was a very hard situation, I wouldn't trade it, because I don't know if I'd still be in that routine of just go, 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 go. Like the coronavirus has really caused, I think, our nation to slow down and to kind of just look at things and look at life. And he really showed me that I needed to turn my eyes and my heart back to him.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. I have some follow-up questions
Yeah.
on that. But before we go there, just walk us through, how did it turn out with your wife, and take us through the rest of the story?
So, again, church is praying, like the power of prayer. You were texting me and saying, hey, I'm praying for you. So many people. Shona's symptoms went away in 2 days.
Wow.
So fever and cough. I mean, the cough kind of lingered a little bit, but she felt better after 2 days. So we truly believe miraculous healing of the Lord. He heard the prayers.
And also kind of going back to the situation where you left the bed with your son in the bed, it seems like Shona's just stronger than you and could fight it off. I'm just saying.
That may be a lesson that I have not learned yet. Maybe this is God speaking to me now.
I don't know. Just there's something we're learning about your wife. Okay. Just
Yes, she is a strong woman. So yeah, I think that in all of that, like he's teaching me that, but her symptoms go away. And the only thing that kind of lingers for us is we have these coughs that the doctor said, hey, you had pneumonia, man. You're going to have a cough for a couple months. My sense of smell hasn't come back fully. It's probably like 90%. But in those days to come, again, just, driving over here, I was listening to the Waymaker song, the song. And there was a moment when I was feeling better, and we were all in the living room together. We were playing worship music in the house, and my wife just began to cry. I'm crying because the Lord was just so faithful to see us through. He carried us. He was there with us. But that process continued of healing. We had someone reach out to us, a family member who knew someone who worked at an infectious disease place. They came, they gave us this antibody test to see if we had antibodies, and we tested positive for that. I had a lot more than my wife. So we know that she definitely had it. I had it. They didn't test the kids. But again, I believe Savannah had it. She was the first one to come down with a cough. And I'm pretty sure my sons had it as well. Okay. So that process of healing, it took a while for me. Shona, 2 days. It took probably over a month for me to start to feel back to who I was before I got sick.
Wow.
Yeah. It was a long process.
Wow. So there's probably someone watching and listening here who is saying, okay, I hear you, Pastor Chris. You talk about, God takes us through trials to, take away our idols, and, don't focus on the gifts, focus on the giver. You're a pastor. You're supposed to say things like that.
Yeah.
But as you're walking through this, how are you wrestling with, there are times that I know I felt like this, and I think there are, I'm sure, others that may be watching or listening that have felt like this. I know my idols are bad, but sometimes the cure seems worse than the disease. Is it really that bad? Why is it that I need to be so reminded of my dependency? Mm-hmm. So here's where I'm trying to get to the question, because I think a lot of times we want to say, God, just leave me alone. Don't afflict me so I can learn your precepts. I feel like I have a good grasp on your precepts.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but what we know is that is an act of his grace and his goodness to be anchored to him and not ourselves or our idols. Can you just talk to that? Like, why is it an act of grace for him to wrestle our grip off of our own dependence and our idols? Like, why do we really want that?
Yeah.
Why is that better for us?
Yeah, I think, we wouldn't let that grip go apart from hard times. I think we could, if everything were perfect, we would say, oh, of course I would lay that down for the Lord, of course. But there are some lessons that can't be learned in a book or even by memorizing scripture or by going to a church service. There's some things that you have to experience. And, I'd say up to this point, the hardest thing in our life was having a son with special needs. And as we walk through that hardest time in our lives, like I don't ever want to make light of it and be like, oh, everything's great. We're blessed and highly favored. Sometimes we can say those corny Christian lines. Yeah. It's hard. And honestly, when we think about the future, it's probably only going to get harder as we get older and he gets bigger. But as I look at it, I wouldn't trade what the Lord has given us in my son Jacob for the world, because it's changed us in ways that we never would have changed otherwise. Like I know that for certain, because we've all got pride. We're hard-hearted, and sometimes God's got to shake us up to show us something. So as I've thought about Jacob over the years, I'm like, okay, God, like you got us through, you've taught this great lesson. I think there was something in me that thought, maybe that's the only trial we'll ever suffer. And yet knowing that, no, that's impossible. There's other things to come. So when this came, like, as I continue to look back, what he taught me, not just the idea of taking away the idols, the idea of intimacy with Jesus. Like, I think it is very possible to go to church every week, to maybe even serve, to even read your Bible every day and to pray and miss out on sweet intimacy with Jesus. Wow. So I'm reading the scriptures before I go into the hospital. And there's I think I was in Mark again, it was very blurry, but it's when they bring the kids to Jesus and he touches them. And I'm sick, and I'm just trying to process, like, what was so great about you touching these kids? Like, did you give them superpowers? What did you do? Like, what was it all about? Right. I lose this sense of touch. I lose this sense of taste and smell, and I start to lose senses. As I've gotten older, I've spent a lot of time processing and asking God questions like, why did you do it like this? Like, God, why did you make us like this? Why did you give us this sense of taste and smell and touch? As you look in the scriptures, what you see is all of those things speak of intimacy. There's this show, I don't know if, did you see The Chosen? The show The Chosen? Yes. Oh, man. So I get out of the hospital.
Time out. If you've not watched The Chosen, go to your app store, download The Chosen, and just go ahead and watch all of it and prepare to just, like, there was one episode, and I feel like everyone has their moment. There was one episode, like all of them, I was like misty. Yes. But there was one episode that so wrecked me. I was weeping, so uncontrollable. It was the one with all the healings. Yes. And where it started with the leper in the beginning. I think it was episode 5. I cried so uncontrollably through that that my wife afterwards, like, seriously, are you going to be okay? Like, do I need to call, do you need, my wife's a therapist, Chris, I don't know if you know that, but she's like, I think I need to call in backup for you, So anyway, it is amazing. And there is good worshipful tears. So if you're like, I don't think I want it, you do. Just stop, turn the podcast episode off, download that, and then continue watching. Yeah. Okay, so The Chosen, continue.
I'm right with you. So from the very first episode at the end, you don't see Jesus the whole episode. He comes on the scene and he calls out Mary's name. And as soon as, every time I see Jesus on this show, I'm weeping. Yes. But it was with the leper. Yes. And so I'm like, here's a man sick, hasn't been touched by anyone in forever, and Jesus touches him. And I was hysterical, because I had just come out of this whole thing where I couldn't touch anyone. And I think we take things for granted, and I think sometimes that's why God does have to bring the trials, to take away those things that he gave us that were gifts, because we're focused so much on them. And what I began to see is that I was missing out on intimacy with the Lord. And he's like, taste and see that the Lord is good. It speaks of intimacy, a personal experience, this idea of touch. So when I got back, I'm quarantined in this back room in our house, and I love to read. So people are like, oh, I bet you were reading that whole time you were sick. And I'm like, no, not really, because it was hard to think, actually. It's hard to see. One of the pills they gave me made me very dizzy. It also felt like the room was spinning. Prayer was difficult. It was a lot of like Nehemiah prayers. It was a lot of short things like, Lord, help me. But man, the worship time that I had, the time just just singing my heart out. My family actually told me they heard me. I didn't think they could. And just like singing and crying, like I was broken before the Lord, but it was such sweet time.
Wow.
And just being with Jesus for the sake of Jesus. There's a song called Nothing Else. And there's the line in that says, more than anything that you can do, I just want you.
Yes.
And as I thought about that and processed that, and he says, more than anything that you can do, Jesus can do anything. And so he could give you everything. He could give you healing, and he could give you money, and he could save your family. He could do everything. But the heart to say more than anything that you could do, which is anything, I just want to be with you. It's brought me to a point where Jesus is becoming, in my experience, my all in all. He should be my all in all. But I had to lose some things that were kind of getting in the way. And I saw him more clearly, and I was able to worship him and adore him. And it's changed the dynamic of who I am. My wife is in the same place, our family. So again, I think the Lord has to do that sometimes to shake us up, to see what really matters. It's been said, you don't know that he's all you need till he's all you have.
Wow.
And I feel like I was in that place where he was all I had.
It's like, it makes me think about, when you go on an adventure with someone.
Yeah.
Like you walk out and you're closer. So whether it's you think back to high school and you're on a sports team that made a states run, or you did a high ropes course
Right.
with your
As a
team or whatever.
yeah.
Like when you go on an adventure, I even think about people that I've been able to walk in ministry through adventures and through crazy seasons. And there's this bond that you have. And when you walk through an adventure with someone, on the other side, there is a deeper, tighter friendship. There's an intimacy within that friendship because you survived that together, or you fought through it together. And what I'm hearing you say, Chris, is that sometimes he walks you through things, not just to, yes, he's teaching you lessons. Yes, he's teaching you principles, but he's walking you through something, just you and him. He's going on an adventure, just you and him. So in the end, it's not that it's not all that he's just eradicated more sin out of your life. That's part of it. It's not just that you have a greater grasp of theological concepts like his faithfulness and his goodness. What I'm hearing you say is, when you've walked through it with Jesus, he's a person. He's God. He's a person. He's living. He's walking with us always. That person, you on the other side have a greater actual relationship, intimacy relationship. He's the friend that sticks closer than a brother. So you actually have a greater friendship with the person of Jesus. It's not just that you've gotten to this new spiritual, level, transcendent level. You actually have a closer intimacy with the person Jesus on the other end of that. And that's what I'm hearing you say when you say things like, you get Jesus. Like that's the prize.
Yes. And that's enough. And coronavirus is not the last trial that I'll walk through in my life, but it is that intimacy with Christ that carries us through. And it just, again, as I look back, losing out on my senses, that intimacy of taste and smell and touch made the experience of coronavirus so much harder mentally and physically. And I think he was teaching me that you need intimacy. You can't just go through the routine of checking the box. I wake up, I have my morning devotion, and that can be very dry. And even going to church can become something very mechanical. We say, and I'm sure many churches say, a relationship, not a religion. That is a living, breathing thing. And that is the sweetest thing that you have, and that is the one thing that can never be taken away from you, and it's Jesus. And I think we just have the propensity to drift and to kind of lose that gaze and that wonder and that awe of who he is, and that we just get to know him, that we get to sit at his feet and be with him. Like, that's everything. But sometimes our lives are so crowded. And I think overall, the coronavirus has kind of slowed things down and taken some things away from some of us. Some of us, have lost things that are more dear than others. Some of us have actually lost loved ones.
Yes.
Some of us lost jobs and things that we put a lot of stock in and love in, and those are good things. But again, the one thing that is the most important is Christ. And he's our treasure. And I was brought to a place where I had to kind of rediscover that, like rediscover my first love for him.
Yes.
And it was hard, but man, it's so beautiful. And again, I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Yeah. I think just for those that have maybe walked with the Lord for a long time, maybe decades, there's the 7 churches in Revelation, and the verse you just quoted just really stuck out to me, Chris. The ones who, he says to the church of Ephesus, you've lost your first love. Of the 7 churches, Ephesus is probably the most mature. This theologically, and he says that. He says, you're theologically sound. You know all the stuff. And you see, the deposit they got from Paul in the book of Ephesians that they got. Some people call it the Grand Canyon of Scripture. Here's this deposit theologically that for a generation, they were solid, mature believers, but they had lost their first love. Yeah. And so it just... to those that are watching that maybe you've walked with the Lord for a long time, both Chris and I as pastors, we can testify to the fact that as pastors, we can be, leading a church, we can be doing all these things, we can be in the Word all the time, doing all the right things, but there's something underneath all that gives all of that life. It is, I like the way you put it, a living, breathing relationship with God, with Jesus, with the person of Jesus. And so on the other side of this, Chris, as on the other side of quarantine, on the other side of coronavirus, what are things in your life that you say, I don't ever want to be the same? I want this on the other end. I want to walk out of this season, and I want this to be different in my life and my family.
Yeah, I don't ever want to... I don't ever want to forsake sitting with Jesus because I'm serving Jesus. He doesn't need me to serve him. It's by his grace that he chooses us and says, I'm going to choose you to serve. And we all have different ways in which we serve. That being a pastor is not the end all be all. We all have a ministry that he's given us to do. Yeah. But I have been guilty often of running so fast that I forsake sitting. And there's even times, I was very convicted one time as I was processing that. Sometimes I'll sit for the purpose of being a better server rather than just enjoying him. And I don't want that anymore. I just want him for him. The idea of community, like I am an introvert of introverts. My dream is to be at home alone with my family in a book. My wife, social butterfly. She wants to have parties all the time, everyone all over. She loves that. And what I found is that as she has pushed me in that sense, community is... It is one of those things that is so vital in my life right now. We do a community group. I'm sure many people do groups. It can't just end with going to church on a Sunday. There's a deeper sense of doing life with people that we were designed for. The gospel's more than just making us sons and daughters. It's making us brothers and sisters. So,
wow, that's dude. If that line right there appears in a City Rev sermon sometime soon, I hope you forget this podcast episode, because I'm not giving you credit for that.
That's fine. It was his first.
God has not just made us sons and daughters; He's made us brothers and sisters. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That's good.
And I think this quarantine and not being able to gather together as a body. We're looking forward to that day. Obviously, we want to be safe and all that. But you're starting to see within the church, people are realizing, I just need people, and I need interaction.
Yes.
I was one to kind of always be like, no, and I still do need my space of just being alone with a book and my family, but I'm way more open because the community that surrounded us and kind of walked through this with us, the Lord used them so greatly to bring us through. We need each other. And that's one of the things as well. It's not just the intimacy piece with the Lord, it's the community with my brothers and sisters that I cannot forsake. So I think those two things, as we walked out of that, are just kind of the shining moments and teachings that the Lord kind of implanted in our hearts through that.
Yeah, that's powerful. I definitely connect with all of those things. And, maybe you are saying, look, my spiritual life seems so dry right now. I haven't been able to be at church. I haven't been on, I love serving alongside my friends and my brothers and sisters, in kids ministry, or I miss, I'm on, I'm on Zoom with my small group and I miss seeing them. And, this could be the Lord drawing you to himself and say, let's deepen that foundation of just meeting you and him. And so I want to challenge you, if you're listening to this, whatever he's walking you through, take advantage of the adventure he wants to go on with you and him. And so, man, hey, as we're wrapping up this episode, Chris, any last thoughts, any last challenges you'd have for those who are watching or listening?
Yeah, I think when it comes to the intimacy piece, I keep going back to the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus just talking about, when you pray, you go into the closet, you close the door. That you got to find that closet. You got to find that space and that time in your day when there's nothing. Like I can't bring my phone in there. Like the phone is like the devil to me. Sometimes it's vibrating and I'm OCD. I can't take the little red numbers on my emails. Like I've got to get that stuff off. So if I bring that into the secret place, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
So I think finding that time, but also the space that it's closed off, that it's you and him. Silence and solitude for me has been so special. And I'm someone that my mind's always going on what's next. Tomorrow, the next day, I got to get my sermon ready, all this stuff. To be able to sit before the Lord and to just be silent with him. And sometimes it's just quiet. And sometimes you just feel his presence. Those are things that I've really taken away. And I would say pursue those things because it is very easy to forsake them and you just get into this routine and life can be dry. Your relationship with him can be dry. If you're not in community, man, get in community, pursue community. It's not easy, it's messy, but
you may have been burned before.
For sure. Like I remember one time we did a group at our house and we were burned and by someone that was a part of our congregation and it was hard. And I was like, man, why even open ourselves up to this? But we've had some of our most beautiful moments and we've walked through not just the mountaintops, but the valleys with other people. And it's beautiful and we need it and we were created for that. So I would say if you're watching or listening to this and you're not part of some deeper community, if you're not doing life with someone, man, make that step, do whatever has to be done. And again, it's not easy, but it's so worthwhile. And I would just say, we've been talking about this, the idea that this is something that is a made-up sickness, that it's not that big of a deal. To in a sense, sure, some people get it and they're asymptomatic, no symptoms, they get through it. I have no underlying conditions. I consider myself somewhat healthy. And it struck me down to the point of, there were some conversations with the Lord, honestly. And I'm not like, please don't take me to be suicidal. I was ready to go home because I didn't want to do it anymore. It was serious. So I think, we're battling right now within the church of like, hey, it's time to get back. The president said so. And yet there's the wisdom of, well, let's do this the right way. Let's do this in the right time. So I would say the seriousness of it, but also to know that God is in all of this and he's doing something I think so amazing within the church. I think when we reemerge, the church is going to be better for it. We're going to be stronger. We're going to be more focused on the things that really matter to him. I think this is part of the revival that he's going to bring. We've seen that through Church United and those things. This is part of that. This is not a detour to that. This is I think a stepping stone to that.
Man, I 100% agree with you on that. And I appreciate your reminder that in this time to have wisdom and have wisdom as a church. I love the unity that's happening. And sometimes I wish our congregation could see that we as pastors, we're like texting each other. Hey, what are you guys doing? What are you guys doing? What are you guys doing? And we're like the pastors in this community, something really historic and special is happening as the church together. And we're going to do different things and that's fine. But there's a unity behind the scenes with the leadership of churches supporting each other in the decisions that are being made. But because there's one thing that we all know, the church in South Florida, Jesus is the chief shepherd. It's his church, and he is going to build his church. The gates of hell cannot stop it, neither can a coronavirus. And I agree with you. I think this is, if this is the work of the enemy, he's playing into God's hands because God is going to use this to bring revival in our hearts, like he's brought a new, fresh revival in your heart. Amen. And he's going to bring this as a revival into our church. And so, yes, we're going to have wisdom and pursue the intimacy with the Lord. So, hey, Chris, thank you so much for sharing this, man.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate it. Yep. You're giving us a window into your intimate journey with the Lord and your family's journey. I pray and hope that it's been an impact on you as you're watching it. So, hey, thank you for joining us, the City Rev Life podcast, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us on City Rev Life. You can subscribe to this podcast, rate and review wherever you're listening to this. And we love it when you share it with your friends on social media. For more videos and content, go ahead and check us out at cityrev.org/podcast or download our City Rev Church app. Have a great day.